What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News, and we've got lots to talk about today. Just before we do, a reminder that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now you can get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys, speaking of action, we've got lots to get to today. I want to start with what initially may have thought would be an injury update, but ended up not quite being the case. So Utah Mammoth forward Logan Cooley left Saturday's game against the St. Louis Blues after getting a tough knee-on-knee hit from Alexei Toropchenko, who was given a misconduct on the play. Cooley was helped off the ice, but he did walk out of the arena under his own power, ended up only suffering a quad contusion. He played actually in the team's loss to the San Jose Sharks on Monday. So, like I said, I think we were maybe expecting to be having a different conversation about Logan Cooley today, but he did in fact play. So, Mike, first up, just want to get your thoughts on the hit from Toropchenko. What did you think of it? And how much do you think the season for the Mammoth hinges on Cooley's health right now, considering he is their leading scorer with 23 points in 27 games?
I thought it was a very questionable hit. I'm actually very surprised that Toropchenko was not suspended for the hit because it was knee on knee. I don't like sometimes the way the NHL does it. They sort of wait to find out whether, the player is actually hurt and then penalize accordingly. And, the fact that Cooley only had a quad contusion and played the next game, that shouldn't matter. I mean, if the player gets a 5-minute major and a game misconduct, do you consider that enough if he blows out the other player's knee? So I hate the way the NHL sort of puts their finger up in the air and decides that way. As for Cooley, in terms of his importance to the team, I mean, he's their leading scorer. He's got 14 goals. Everything is tightly compacted in both the East and the West. I mean, I think if he was out for an extended period of time, that would essentially end Utah's chances of making the playoffs. With him in there as a centerpiece, along with JJ Peterka and Gunther and a group of young forwards, I think they have a chance in a very tough Western Conference playoff race.
Yeah, very tough, especially in the Central Division. Kelsey, I'm sure the Mammoth are all collectively breathing a sigh of relief that Cooley was in fact able to play again on Monday. But what did you think of the hit? And do you agree with Mike that their success or lack thereof will hinge on Cooley's health?
Well, first of all, I do agree with Mike because, I mean, if you're taking your leading scorer out of the equation here, that is a blow for any team, but especially for the Utah Mammoth. They have another contributing cast of characters, and Mike kind of ran those down. You got Schmaltz, you got Keller, you got Gunther. But, I mean, beyond that, it's kind of in Peterka too. But beyond that, they don't have, like, the guy, I don't think. Beyond Cooley, and Keller's kind of that guy too, but you need a couple of those guys. So if he goes down, leading scorer, I think I agree. I think that their season kind of hinges on that. So all of Utah can breathe a sigh of relief there. And as far as the hit, I also agree with Mike on that. I don't like how the NHL hands out punishment based on injury. I think that's been an issue for a long, long time. And it's, something that needs to be corrected at some point because I didn't like it. I didn't like the hit.
Yeah, definitely. I would have to agree with Mike that whether the player is injured or not, or how severe the injury is, shouldn't really factor into the punishment. If it's a bad hit, it's a bad hit and should be punished accordingly. Of course, he was, as I mentioned, given the misconduct for the game at least. And as we said, I'm sure the Mammoth and all of Utah very, very happy to see Logan Cooley back on the ice on Monday. Shifting gears a little bit. The Calgary Flames this week. This is a team that we've talked about quite a bit on the show, Mike, about, where they're kind of going, what their franchise trajectory is right now. They announced, at least rather surprisingly, at least to me, 2-year contract extensions for general manager Craig Conroy, team president Don Maloney, and senior vice presidents and assistant GMs Brad Pascal and Dave Norris. So all of these guys signed their contract extensions before the start of the 2025-26 season. So that means that they're signed through 2028. So Mike, as I said, this is a team we've talked about quite a bit that is sort of at, I think we could say, a potential turning point, a potential crossroads, depending on how they end up managing their roster this season. Are you confident that this management group in Calgary can show signs of a turnaround in the time that they have between now and the end of their extension?
No. I don't have an issue with extending somebody like Conroy. I mean, he's young in his career. Or Pascal, and he's been a hockey man for a while and has a good reputation. I do have a bit of an issue with Don Maloney based on the comments that he made recently about, pushing back on sort of the rebuild. I mean, and Dave Nonis has been a general manager in Vancouver and Toronto, has been a long associate of Brian Burke. I mean, if you look at his record in Vancouver and Toronto, wasn't laced with success. I think the problem here is the recognition that this team, I mean, they may be within mathematical range of a playoff spot, but Dustin Wolf standing on his head for most of the season last year kept them close to a playoff spot. And in a Canadian market, they can't admit that they're rebuilding. But you look at this roster, and it's a rebuilding roster. I mean, they have a few good young players, but, and a young kid like Parak, who's probably going to play for Team Canada at the World Junior, but they're nowhere close to be having enough talent, and they're in sell mode probably with Rasmus Anderson and maybe Nazem Kadri. So for a manager or a team president to come out and say, we're not rebuilding, I wouldn't give that guy an extra minute, let alone an extra 2 years. So do I have a lot of confidence in the management group in Calgary? No, I have confidence in some of the people in Calgary.
Yeah, I remember we actually talked about that very comment on the show about how he pushed back on the idea that this team was rebuilding. Meanwhile, they're one of the worst teams in the league right now. So Kelsey, do you agree with Mike? What are your thoughts on giving these guys another 2 years to try and turn things around in Calgary?
Yeah, I think this was probably a bit questionable because I'm not super confident they're going to be able to turn this thing around in 2 years either. A lot of their highest producers on their roster are aging stars at this point, and they're kind of at a crossroads where, you mentioned Parak, you mentioned a couple other guys. There's also Wittenbach. He's having a really good season in the NCAA. He's a freshman, but I think a lot of those guys are still a few years out from reaching, full potential or even reaching the NHL level in the first place. So I just don't think they have enough young talent that's going to be NHL ready in time to kind of make that transition work within 2 years. So I'm kind of with Mike here. I'm a little bit baffled as to why these extensions were handed out prematurely. And I would be very surprised to see this team compete within the next 2 years for sure.
Yeah, that gap, the timelines need to line up a little bit better, I think, between the current wave and the next wave in Calgary until we even know what that next wave looks like. Obviously, Calgary Flames having a rough start to the season. One team, though, that has actually done surprisingly well, I think, especially as of late, is the Philadelphia Flyers. So very quietly, they have won 5 of their last 7 games. They are now 14-8-3. They're now just 3 points back of the Carolina Hurricanes for the Metro Division lead, right there with Kelsey's Pittsburgh Penguins, who we're going to talk about in a minute. Mike, what do you think has led to the Flyers' success so far? This was a team that is and has been rebuilding and weren't afraid to admit it. Do you think that they can be competitive in the Metro for the rest of the season, or is this going to fizzle out at some point?
I'm unsure about whether they can maintain this. I mean, right now they're getting ridiculously good goaltending from Dan Vladar. Trevor Zegras is leading the team with 25 points. Now, he's not the number one center because he's hideous on faceoffs and not very good defensively, but he is a very good offensive producer. A sort of a spanner in the works could be the injury to Tyson Forster. He had a shoulder injury taking a one-timer, and there's some question about whether how serious this injury is. He's their leading goal scorer. So, there's not a lot of depth with the Flyers. I mean, they're having a better season than expected, but if they lose Forster for a significant period of time, that's going to hurt their chances.
Kelsey, are you surprised at all by the success that the Flyers have had, and what do you think has been working for them so far?
Well, Mike mentioned it. I think this is largely on goaltending. I think the Zegras addition has helped quite a lot too. I mean, he's a contributor a little bit on the power play, and it was pretty. I don't know if you saw the clip of him kind of trying to goad Connor Clifton into fighting him. He kind of faked him out a couple times, so he has a little bit of that edge to him. I think he fits in there quite nicely for that club. But as Mike mentioned, I mean, in terms of being a number one center, in terms of being defensively responsible, I don't see that with Zegras, and that's kind of the role he's playing right now. And that Forster injury is going to, I think, determine a lot of things. And that was a freak injury, too. I mean, you don't see it very often where a player gets hurt on, a one-timer. And he went down the runway right away. So, I mean, obviously, we don't know the extent of that yet. But if he's out for any significant amount of time, I find it hard to believe that this team can sustain the pace. And they can't rely on goaltending all year either. And especially in Dan Vladar, who doesn't really have a track record of being able to sustain this level of play. And they also don't have a reliable backup situation right now. So I think there's just a lot going right for them right now, and they'd have to kind of keep hitting streaks of luck to really keep this going the rest of the season. But we'll see what happens with Forster here.
Yeah, well, of course, Forster injured and in the game against the Penguins. So, Kelsey, I want to talk to you about the Penguins here because they had a new face that was called up, a new old face, I guess, someone who Penguins fans should be very familiar with, and that's Rutger McGroarty. He was called up for his 2025-26 debut last night against the Flyers. He played for just over 12 minutes. He had 7 points in 5 AHL games before he got called up. So, of course, just by way of review, McGroarty was drafted by the Jets in the first round back in 2022. He forced that trade out of Winnipeg in 2024. We're now getting our first look at him this season with the Penguins. So, Kelsey, what role can we expect McGroarty to play with Pittsburgh this season?
Interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens over this next month because, they still have Raquel out. They still have Brossoit out. Brossoit should be close to returning. They kind of have a hole, like 2 holes in that on the top 6 on the left side. But right now, he's kind of on that kid line with Ben Kindle and Ville Koivunen. And they didn't produce a point against the Flyers, but they were flying all night long. And they really had a lot going for them offensively. I think this could really be kind of something that works for the Penguins, especially when they do get healthy. When they have Raquel back, they have Brossoit back. This team is much better when they can roll 4 lines. And McGroarty on that third line with Kindle, who we've seen, this season, his ability as a playmaker and how advanced he is for 18. And then Koivunen hasn't produced yet, but he definitely has the ceiling to be a high IQ playmaker. And he's really close to getting that first NHL goal. He's gripping his stick a little bit tight right now, but I think McGroarty's kind of the last piece of that line because he's a proven finisher. In those 5 AHL games, he scored in 4 consecutive games to start that run. He had a goal and 3 points in 5 games last season at the end of the season for the Penguins. So I think he's a little bit of a chameleon. He can fill in a top 6 role if he needs to in the meantime while they're waiting for those guys to get healthy. But I kind of like the idea of this third line with McGroarty, Kindle, and Koivunen because if they can, really get going, it makes the Penguins a much deeper team. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens with that line here.
Yeah, Mike, obviously McGroarty was a big get for the Penguins last year or 2 years ago when it was. I think that he kind of is a big, in a way, a face of the future of the next wave for the Penguins. So do you expect him to play a big role or more of a depth role, at least this season, before, the next wave fully takes over in Pittsburgh?
Well, I think Kelsey's correct that he probably fits in on that kid line, and the kid line I can't imagine is going to be in the top two lines. It's probably a third line, but no question, he's going to be a contributor going forward. They acquired him for Braden Yeager, with the purpose of him being sort of a higher level player. And Kyle Dubas was smart to keep him down in the American Hockey League and play 60 games last year and get some experience at the pro level and not push him into the NHL. I'm curious in terms of where the Penguins are going to be, because I looked at them going into the season with all those unrestricted free agents, and including Malkin, including some fairly prominent players, and saying, okay, when does the shopping begin? Does Kyle Dubas have unlimited minutes on his cell phone? Because he sure as hell is going to get a lot of calls from general managers interested in adding players at the deadline. But as long as they stay in the race, are they going to trade the Jaris? Are they going to trade some of these guys, or are they going to keep them? And is the pressure of having Sidney Crosby on a over 50 goal pace and them being in the race, does that factor into them staying with this group, or do they still decide to trade off players before March the 6th?
Well, like you said, Penguins and the Flyers, who we talked about earlier, I think both teams that are maybe outperforming expectations a little bit this season, and for very different reasons and different circumstances as well. That being said, there are certainly some other teams that are underperforming expectations, to put it lightly. Of course, one of those teams being the Toronto Maple Leafs, who sit dead last in the Atlantic Division as of the time of this recording. So the Leafs, they're looking to get back on track, of course. As they do this, a little bit surprisingly, the team's goaltending depth has actually really come around in the absence of Anthony Stolarz. So you've got Dennis Hildeby has a .914 save percentage in 6 games. He just had a 33 save performance in the win over the Pittsburgh Penguins. Sorry, Kelsey. Joseph Woll had a .919 save percentage in 6 games, along with a 2.62 goals against. So, Mike, first of all, what do you think of the Leafs goaltending depth right now? If all these guys are healthy, where does it kind of stack up against other teams in the league? Do you think that the goaltending finally figuring it out could be the sign of a turning point, or is it even going to matter if they can't get the rest of their game back on track?
Ironically, the Anthony Stolarz and Caden Primo, who they claimed from Carolina, both of them had save percentages under 900 with a full defense and pretty much a full roster, except for Scott Lawton. And Hildeby and Joseph Woll are playing behind a defense that doesn't have Tanev, that doesn't have Brandon Carlo, who's going to be out an extended period of time. And they're playing Dakota Mermis and Philippe Myers and Troy Stetcher significant minutes. So that just makes the save percentage that Hildeby and Woll have put up even more impressive. The thing that sort of as an observer of the Maple Leafs that sort of scratches your head, Anthony Stolarz got hurt last year after playing a heavy workload in October and November, and he was out for 2 months with a knee injury. And in spite of that evidence, they did it again and only played Caden Primo in the second of back-to-backs. And this was, Woll was out on his leave of absence. Hildeby had a very good training camp, and instead of playing Hildeby more than just 3 games, like they played Primo, they sent Hildeby down to the minors, and they played Primo. That led to Stolarz being injured, and we don't know when Stolarz is coming back. Their goaltending is better now, but the rest of the team, in terms of injuries, in terms of, finding themselves under Craig Berube in the post-Marner world, I mean, it's been difficult. They're starting to play better, but the East is so tightly compacted. Even though they're last in the conference, they string together 2 or 3 wins, they're right back in the playoff race.
Yeah, very true. So anything could change in just a couple of games, like you said. Kelsey, how surprised, impressed, any other adjective are you by the goaltending situation in Toronto? And do you think that it'll be enough to help this team kind of turn things around?
I mean, I'm a big believer that goaltending can take a team quite a long way. And just watching even the Pittsburgh Penguins this season, they've gotten great goaltending this season and they're in a playoff spot. That's kind of carried them to a playoff spot. And, the Leafs haven't been as fortunate with the rest of their situation. But I do think, if this roster can kind of turn on the Jets and start to produce a little bit more, start to, get Hildeby and get Wool more help in front of them. I think that this could be, an X factor for them in determining whether or not they make the playoffs. Because as Mike mentioned, we don't know how long Stolarz is going to be out, but both these guys are pulling their weight and they're playing really well for the Leafs. But I just think in general, your team kind of goes as your goaltending goes. It's hard to mask deficiencies to an extent, but I think these guys are doing a great job of masking some of those deficiencies for the Leafs. So I don't think it's an easy thing to account for the production that they lost when they lost Mitch Marner, and that's still a puzzle that they have to solve if they're going to get anywhere in the playoffs. But I do think this goaltending could be an X factor and be the determining factor if they do start to turn things around a little bit here otherwise. So I think that it could take them to a playoff spot, carry them through the playoffs. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, well, like you said, a lot to be said for good goaltending. That's kind of where you start with building a team. You build from the crease out. So, with that being said, looking at the top 10 list on BetMGM for the current Vezina Trophy odds, I've got to say, some pretty surprising, pretty unexpected names. I won't say surprising based on how they've been performing so far, but unexpected if you had looked at this list before the season. So, I want to read off the top 10 really quickly. Number 1, the favorite, Logan Thompson. Number 2, Andrei Vasilevsky. 3, Igor Shesterkin. 4, Spencer Knight. 5, Lucas Dostal. 6, Ilya Sorokin. 7, Scott Wedgwood. 8, Jeremy Swayman. 9, Connor Hellebuck. And 10, Jesper Wallstedt. So obviously a lot of unexpected names on that list if you had looked at it before the season or even earlier in the season. So Mike, who of those names do you think is the most surprising? And do you expect any surprises for the finalists by the end of the year in the top 3?
I mean, the most surprising is Wedgwood, because Wedgwood has been a backup most of his career, and he's playing fantastic with Colorado to the point that now he's on the short list for Team Canada. I mean, I could have made a ton of money at BetMGM if I had bet that Scott Wedgwood was going to be a potential finalist for the Vezina. And if he keeps playing the way he is, he's probably going to be in the top 3. I think he has one loss right now. In terms of the other names, I'm a little surprised that Shesterkin is third because he's not having the usual year that he has, and the Rangers are really struggling right now. Thompson's having a great year. Vasilevsky, after a really bad 0-3-2 start, has been the main reason why Tampa Bay has been so good. And the only other name I would say is sort of surprising is Wallstedt, but if you look at Wallstedt's stats compared to Philip Gustafsson, I believe he's undefeated, and Gustafsson now is under 500. So I would start playing Wallstedt a little more if I were the Minnesota Wild.
Kelsey, do you agree? Any other kind of surprises jump out at you on this list?
I mean, I agree with Mike here. I think Wedgwood's the big one because he is playing like a starting goaltender this season, which, we haven't seen in the past. I do think to some extent he could be being helped by the team in front of him because Colorado's clicking on all cylinders right now. I think they could probably have the most average goaltender in the league on their team, and things would probably still look pretty good for them. So I've been impressed by his play so far. You can't deny the season he's having. So obviously he's the biggest surprise in this list for me. And I don't want to say this is necessarily a surprise because he's been doing it for such a long time. But it's just insane to me that we see Andrei Vasilevsky still in these conversations. He's been doing it for so long, and the way Tampa started the season, things weren't looking good for them, but they've been the hottest team in the league recently, and he's once again a big reason why. So I'm not surprised to see Vasilevsky there, but at the same time, it's his longevity has been a pretty cool thing to watch for Tampa. And he's in those conversations every year. He never seems to get out of those conversations. So, but for me, the big surprise is Wedgwood. I agree with Mike there.
I personally am so here for it. I love a little shake up in the top three. Get Scott Wedgwood in there. He's having a fantastic year. Sticking with goaltending, want to throw out a name that we haven't heard in a while, but is still floating around out there, and that's Laurent Brossoit. So Elliot Friedman reported this week that the Chicago Blackhawks are giving teams permission to talk to Brossoit. So again, Brossoit, he's 32 years old. He carries a $3.2 million cap hit. He last played in the 2024 playoffs. He's been out since then with an injury, so for over 18 months. He's going to have a conditioning stint in the AHL this week. Now, he was exceptional for the Winnipeg Jets in his last regular season. He had a .927 save percentage, 2 goals against in his 23 games, so he's a member of the Blackhawks organization right now, but the Blackhawks currently don't have a roster spot available for him. The conditioning stint that he'll have in the AHL will essentially be a showcase, an audition for other teams that are looking to bolster their goaltending depth. So like Kelsey mentioned earlier, lots of teams looking for goaltending. Goaltending can take a team a long way. Mike, do you think that Brossoit could be an impactful part for a contending team this season as teams are looking to bolster their goalie depth?
I think he could, but I can't imagine with his history of injuries that a team who's contending would bring him in for anything more as a veteran backup. He's had good years before. I mean, if you remember, he was the starter for Vegas and then got hurt in the playoffs, and then Aiden Hill took over, and then they won the Stanley Cup that year. And he was the backup to Connor Hellebuyck, and his stats were on par with what Hellebuyck had that season. But the injury question, I think, would have a chilling effect in terms of depending on that player to make regular starts to carry a starter's workload. So if a team out there has an injury to their backup goaltending, I could see them trading a draft pick to bring him in. But if it's a team looking for a starter like Edmonton or Montreal, I think they're looking for bigger fish.
For sure. Kelsey, do you agree?
Yeah, I think this is I would agree that it's probably going to be more so a backup situation. But I mean, if some of these teams want to take a chance on a goaltender, I mean, we're talking about the Edmonton Oilers. We all know how badly their goaltending has hurt them this season. Even the Ottawa Senators kind of have a murky situation with their goaltending. I think there may be some teams, some desperate teams who, are in the mix, in the wild card mix, who might want to take a chance on a guy like him. I think with the rising cap, his cap hit's low enough that some of these teams can kind of make it work with a little bit of cap gymnastics, and then it shouldn't affect them too much going forward if things don't work out. But I think this might be a roll the dice kind of situation, and very dependent on where some of these teams are, come playoff time, come the deadline. Because I'm looking at the Ottawa Senators, I'm looking at Edmonton, some of these other teams who are probably going to be in the mix, but really, really, really need to fix their goaltending situations, or at least have, as Mike said, a reliable backup. So I do think that this is probably more likely a situation where he ends up in a backup role, but I am keeping an eye on some of those teams that just might be desperate for any solution and might just take a chance on him come deadline time.
I am a little surprised, though, with Chicago doing as well as they are, and their backup right now is Arvid Soderblom, whose goals against is 3.53. You would think that if they thought that they were a legitimate playoff contender, that they would say, oh, we could bring in Brossoit, and he's somebody who could improve our backup goaltending. Instead, it seems that they're shopping him out there. So That I think that sends a little bit of a signal and probably affects the price that they'll get in terms of a trade.
I mean, maybe they think that they can ask for more for Brossoit, for a player of his caliber, a proven goaltender of his caliber. Even as we said, if he is only a backup, of course, has the injury history that we've mentioned, but fantastic last regular season with the Winnipeg Jets in 2024, which brings us to our final topic today. We got to talk about the Winnipeg Jets. Mike, as you well know, the Jets lost 5-1 to the Buffalo Sabres on Monday. After the loss, head coach Scott Arniel did confirm that the Jets held a closed-door, players-only meeting. So Jets have just 5 wins in their last 14 games since November 1st. They are 6th in the Central Division, with the top 3 teams in the division being Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota, really widening that gap quite a bit. So what do you think is going on with the Jets, Mike? And do you think they can get it back on track before it's too late?
Well, the injury to Hellebuck came at a bad time. I mean, right now you have Eric Comrie, who's never been more than just a decent backup in any other place other than Winnipeg. In Buffalo and New Jersey, he wasn't really a good goaltender. But they have him and Thomas Milic to carry the bulk of the goaltending until Hellebuck comes back. I think that's part of the problem. I mean, it was a pretty uninspiring effort in Buffalo. They were down 3-0, and then got a goal to, sort of bring a little bit of life, and then Buffalo scored right after, and then the game was essentially over with. So I know that some of the Team Canada hierarchy, Julian Brisebois and Don Sweeney, were in attendance, purportedly to look at somebody like Mark Scheifele, who was on the bubble for Team Canada. I mean, honestly, based on last night, I would be looking elsewhere, because he was pretty uninspiring, and Kyle Connor was the only guy who sort of made any impression. So they're in a bad place right now, and if they keep playing the way they're playing, they can find themselves outside of the playoffs when Hellebuck does come back.
Or maybe, hey, we were just talking about it, maybe a potential reunion for Brossoit. If we see how long that Hellebuck is out, they might need some goaltending help. Kelsey, what's your confidence level in the Jets to turn this around? Obviously, they had such a dominant regular season last year, really shocking. I think a lot of people being even better than expected, and to see them kind of tumble so hard this year, what's your confidence level they can get it back?
Well, I think, like Mike said, this largely depends on Hellebuck. He's one of the best goaltenders in the world for a reason, and losing that is a really big loss. So I mean that's going to be a really big determining factor, I think, for them. But also, I mean, I just think that they have a bunch of guys that are underperforming this season. You look at Cole Perfetti; he only has 4 points in 23 games. You look at Nemesnikov. 8 points in 25 games. So there are a lot of players, on the depth side of their roster that just aren't doing enough right now, and that you probably expect more out of. So I'm kind of looking for those players to start to turn a corner at some point, and really start producing more in those roles that they're in. So I think the big guys on the roster continue to get it done. Hellebuck's going to be a big determining factor for them, but I'm also just looking for some of those guys to turn a corner. I think they will. So I do think, this team's stingy defensively. They're very well structured. They're a team that I think can kind of tread water until their goaltender comes back. But I think they really need to start getting more production out of the depth of their roster, because that's just something that hasn't happened for them quite enough this season. So if those guys can start to turn around, I think they can tread water till Hellebuck comes back.
Well, I'll tell you what, after being in the building, seeing the Jets play against the Nashville Predators on Saturday, I think what they might need is just more games against those guys, because the Jets looked fantastic in that game, including Eric Comrie. Looked like he could have been on that Vezina list as well. And Cole Perfetti scored one of his goals, his first goal, I think, in quite a while. So, definitely interesting team to keep an eye on with the Jets. And to Kelsey's point, goaltending can take you a long way or set you back really far if you're Vezina goaltender is out for an extended period of time. So we'll see what happens with the Jets. Of course, if you want to read all of the latest about what's going on with the New York Jets, the Winnipeg Jets, the New York Rangers, Islanders, Buffalo Sabres, Pittsburgh Penguins, of course, any of the teams in the NHL, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today for this edition of the Wraparound. We do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode next time. For Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan, and we will see you Thursday.